All right, let's just dive right in. If you open up a modern map of the Middle East today, you're easily going to spot Iran. But look a little closer, scan those borders, and you'll notice something pretty huge is missing. You will not find Persia. And honestly, that's kind of strange. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our historical detective hats to trace the absolute mystery of how a name famous for literally over 2,000 years, seemingly just vanished from our maps overnight. Because think about it, the Persian Empire went toe-to-toe with ancient Greece. Cyrus the Great built one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, ruling from these extraordinary cities like Persepolis. I mean, for centuries, Europeans were absolutely obsessed with Persian carpets, Persian art, and Persian culture. And then, in 1935, maps that had always proudly displayed the word Persia suddenly started saying Iran. So we gotta ask the central question here. Whatever happened to Persia? Was this mighty country conquered? Did some massive revolution just suddenly erase its old identity? Or did a completely new country replace it? Section 1. The Map Mystery. Two simultaneous traditions. Well, the answer is actually way stranger, and honestly much more fascinating than a simple conquest. Because the truth is, Persia never actually disappeared. And Iran? Well, it wasn't a new name at all. To understand why one single country ended up with two distinct names, we have to grasp one core concept. For centuries, two completely different naming traditions were operating at the exact same time. It really all just depended on where you were standing. If you were on the outside looking in, you used one name. If you were on the inside looking out, you used another. So let's trace both of these threads, starting with the outside perspective. Section 2. Where Persia came from. To figure out the origins of that Western label, we've got to travel back, way back, to the 6th century BCE. A new power is rising in the ancient world, led by a ruler named Cyrus the Great. Now, Cyrus and his successors build what we now call the Achaemenid Empire. And this thing is absolutely massive. It's stretching from parts of Central Asia all the way over to Egypt and the Mediterranean. But here's the thing. Cyrus's people actually originated from one very specific region in the southwest of today's Iran. They called this home region Parsa, which is an area we roughly know today as modern Fars. So, when the ancient Greeks encountered this sprawling mighty empire, they took the name associated with that localized region, Parsa, and they rendered it in Greek as Persius. And from Persius, we eventually get the English word Persia. Now, here is the absolutely crucial point. This was a regional name that got mistakenly applied to a massive empire. The Greeks made a bit of an error, to be honest. You see, Persia originally referred to just one region and its specific people, but the empire itself was vastly larger and way more diverse. However, to outsiders, especially in the Greek and later the Western traditions, that regional name just stuck. One part of the country literally became the name that all outsiders used for the whole shebang. Section 3. The Ancient Roots of Iran. This naturally leads us to a pretty massive question, right? If outsiders were calling it Persia, what did the people actually living inside the Iranian world call their own home? Well, ancient Persian royal inscriptions contain forms related to Arya, identifying an Iranian or Aryan affiliation. But by the time we hit the Sasanian period, starting in the 3rd century CE, this political concept becomes incredibly clear. The Sasanian kings used the Middle Persian term Iran. They described their realm as Iran Shar, which roughly translates to the realm or empire of the Iranians. I mean, we have royal inscriptions and coins from around 1700 years ago where Sasanian rulers literally presented themselves as the kings of Iran. And that brings us to a major historical misconception that we absolutely need to clear up right now. When you hear someone casually say, "Oh, Persia changed its name to Iran in 1935, there is a giant logical flaw there. As we just learned from the coins of those Sasanian kings, the word Iran is far, far older than 1935. It has incredibly deep ancient roots. The outside world and the people actually living there just weren't using the same terminology in the same way. It's really that simple. Section 4. Surviving the Fall of Empires. But, history doesn't just stand still. So what happens when the empires fall? The Iranian world went through some traumatic, violent upheavals. In the 7th century, Arab armies conquered the Sasanian Empire. The old imperial system totally collapsed, and Islam spread, making Arabic enormously important in administration and scholarship. Now, you might think this would just end the story of Iran right then and there, but it didn't. Moving into the Middle Ages, dynasties were changing constantly. Turkic rulers arrived, Mongol armies invaded, but through all of this chaos, while the political map kept changing, the cultural identity proved much, much harder to erase. In fact, Persian court culture often ended up influencing the foreign rulers themselves. Finally, by the 16th century, the Safavid dynasty stepped in and reunified the territory. But how exactly did that identity survive those insanely turbulent centuries in between? Well, the answer is literature. A new form of Persian developed and essentially became one of the greatest literary languages of the Islamic world. The poets preserved the past. Specifically poets like Ferdowsi, who reinvented memories of Iran's pre-Islamic history. His massive epic, the Shahnameh, told these soaring stories of legendary kings, heroes, and the land of Iran. It acted as this incredible cultural anchor, preserving the internal identity, even when the political borders were totally erased. So this cultural endurance really paved the way for the early 16th century when the Safavid dynasty came to power. And this is a massive turning point. The Safavids reunified much of the Iranian plateau under one single state. They established Twelver Shia Islam as the dominant religion, which crucially helped distinguish their state from their powerful Sunni neighbors like the Ottoman Empire. Over time, a highly recognizable Iranian political territory and identity strengthened all over again. But here is the kicker. Europeans stubbornly continued using that familiar old word. To them, the whole place was still just Persia. Section 5, the 1935 name change. So we have these two completely different naming traditions running parallel for centuries, essentially setting up an inevitable collision. Let's fast forward to the 20th century. In 1925, a man named Reza Shah becomes the monarch. He's a modernizer, aggressively pushing to build a stronger, centralized state through a massive scale of reforms. We're talking constructing railways, reorganizing old government institutions, opening a modern university in Tehran, changing national dress regulations, and strengthening the military. But culturally, his state increasingly emphasizes Iran's pre-Islamic past and its native national identity. Simply put, he wants the world to see his country the exact same way his country sees itself. And that brings us to the real climax of our historical detective story. In 1935, Reza Shah's government issues a formal decree. They officially ask foreign governments to use Iran rather than Persia in all official international communications. Now, to a lot of foreigners reading the newspapers back then, it looks like Persia had just suddenly changed its name out of nowhere. But from the Iranian perspective, Reza Shah didn't invent a new country. The international community was simply being asked to finally align with the country's native historical name. The country wasn't changing at all. It was just the outside label that was getting an update. Unsurprisingly, not everybody thought this was a brilliant idea. It sparked a massive debate. On one side, you had the argument of throwing away cultural prestige. The name Persia carried enormous international weight. It was instantly associated with poetry, art, ancient civilization, and luxury. For some people, abandoning it meant throwing away centuries of global brand recognition. But on the other side, it was all about reclaiming historical identity. It was about standing up and asserting the name that the people actually inside the borders had been using for over a millennium. This debate raged on for decades, which eventually led to a rather diplomatic twist. In 1959, during the reign of Reza Shah's son, Mohammad Reza Shah, the government made a slight adjustment. They indicated that actually, both Persia and Iran could be used interchangeably in certain contexts. However, the die was basically cast. In international diplomacy and geography, the established political name Iran firmly remained the standard. Section 6. Persia is still everywhere. So does that mean Persia is just dead and gone forever? Well, take a look around the modern world. The country on the map is Iran, the citizens are Iranian, but we still commonly say the Persian language. We study Persian literature. We buy Persian carpets, eat Persian cuisine, pet Persian cats, and we navigate the waters of the Persian Gulf. The word Persia survived because it evolved. It stopped being just a political label on a map and became deeply, deeply embedded as a description of an enduring cultural tradition and civilization. So, if we ask where did Persia go, we're honestly asking the wrong question entirely, because it didn't go anywhere. Persia didn't just become Iran overnight in 1935. The outside world simply finally learned the true name of a place that had been telling its own story in its own language for thousands of years. History is rarely as simple as a line drawn on a map or some sudden decree by a king. It's a complex, messy web of perspectives, inside and out. The names we use, they're just the tip of a very deep historical iceberg. Time leaves clues, and we just follow them. So the next time you look at a globe, what other ancient, forgotten names do you think are hiding right there in plain sight? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the map.